Attendance at a recent Indiana Fever game raised questions that the league's promotional apparatus has not been prepared to answer. Overhead camera footage circulated widely after the broadcast showed extended sections of empty seating well into the second half. Not during warm-ups, not at halftime, but during live play. For a franchise that spent the better part of the last 2 years positioning itself as the central story of women's professional basketball in America, the images were difficult to contextualize as anything other than a warning. The gate figures were compounded by secondary market data that emerged from the same cycle. Tickets to the game were available on resale platforms for as little as $12 and $13. That pricing did not reflect last-minute discounting or minor market indifference. It reflected active consumer withdrawal from a product that, by every institutional measure, should have been among the most sought after in the sport. The gap between the league's stated narrative of explosive growth and the transactional reality of what fans were actually willing to pay was not subtle. It was structural. What made the optics considerably worse was the nature of the opponent. The Fever were not playing a conference rival in a nationally televised showdown. They were playing Nigeria, a national team participating in a preseason exhibition format that, under normal circumstances, should have generated a comfortable, uncomplicated victory. Instead, the third quarter ended at 15-12. The starters, when present on the floor, performed at a level consistent with their individual reputations. The moment the second unit entered the rotation, the competitive dynamic shifted in ways that were visible not just on the scoreboard, but in the pace, spacing, and decision-making of every possession. That disparity is not a new observation. It has been documented across multiple games, multiple opponents, and multiple contexts. What changed is that it is now happening in front of partially empty arenas and being discussed openly by the fan base that was, 18 months ago, the most energized constituency in the league. The coaching situation sits at the center of nearly every substantive critique being directed at the organization. Stephanie White, in her second stint as head coach of the Fever, has faced accumulating criticism not only for in-game decisions, but for what many observers describe as a tactical framework that does not adequately reflect the capabilities of the players she is working with. The complaints are specific. Caitlin Clark, the player whose arrival in Indiana generated the attendance surge, the broadcast interest, and the jersey revenue that now underwrites the franchise's market position, is not being used in ways that maximize what she demonstrably does well. Clark's strengths are well documented and statistically supported. She initiates offense from range with efficiency that is rare at any level of the sport. She reads pick-and-roll coverage quickly and makes decisions at a tempo that disrupts conventional defensive preparation. She is, when operating within a system designed around her skill set, one of the most difficult players in the league to contain. The question being asked by a significant portion of the fan base, including many who have followed women's basketball for decades and are not simply projecting from the college game, is whether the offensive system currently in place in Indiana is built to express those capabilities or whether it is constraining them. The evidence cited in support of the criticism is not anecdotal. When Clark is used off the ball for extended stretches, her influence on possession outcomes decreases measurably. When defensive schemes are constructed to limit her catch-and-shoot opportunities, the Fever's secondary creators have not consistently demonstrated the ability to generate equivalent value. The result is an offense that becomes predictable when the primary option is taken away, and opponents have had enough game film to understand exactly how to apply that pressure. White's defenders within the organization point to the broader roster construction as the more foundational problem. That argument is not without merit. The Indiana Fever's depth chart beyond its top 3 contributors represents one of the more significant gaps in the league between a team's headlining talent and its supporting infrastructure. The players available in rotation spots 6 through 10 have not, in meaningful game situations, performed at a level that allows the starters to be managed conservatively. The result is a coaching staff that faces a genuine structural constraint, the inability to rest primary contributors without absorbing substantial performance deterioration. But the counterargument is that coaching is, in part, the art of maximizing available resources. The charge leveled by critics is not only that the roster has limitations, but that the coaching staff has not consistently found solutions that offset those limitations through preparation, scheme, or rotation management. There is a meaningful difference between losing games because the personnel is outmatched and losing games because the personnel is being used in ways that reduce its effectiveness. The fan base is increasingly skeptical that what is occurring in Indiana is purely the former. The front office has attracted its own share of criticism, largely independent of the coaching debate. The roster construction decisions that produced the current depth problem did not happen in isolation. They were the product of a front office philosophy that, according to a significant number of observers, has prioritized the optics of association with high-profile players over the unglamorous work of building roster depth. Signing players whose names generate social engagement is not the same as signing players who can hold a lead in the third quarter against a team with fewer resources. The Indiana Fever's current situation suggests that distinction has not always been made clearly enough. There is also a broader question about how the front office communicates with, and responds to, its fan base. The supporters who filled Gainbridge Fieldhouse during the initial surge of Clark's first season were not passive consumers. Many of them were new to the sport, drawn in by a specific player's talent and personality. Many others were longtime fans of women's basketball who saw the attention being paid to the Fever as an opportunity for the league to demonstrate that it could sustain interest, not just generate it. Both groups are now expressing, in varying registers, the same concern that the organization is treating the attendance figures and the broadcast numbers as a terminal destination rather than a starting point. The broadcast experience itself drew pointed commentary following the most recent game. Amazon Prime's production of the contest was, for a portion of the third quarter, transmitted without commentary. The technical failure, announcers going silent during live action, would be unremarkable as an isolated incident. In the current context, it read as something closer to an emblem, a league that has repeatedly cited its broadcast partnerships as evidence of institutional progress, aired a nationally available game without play-by-play coverage during a competitive stretch of the third quarter. The production values that are supposed to signal seriousness and investment were, for several minutes, absent. The game continued. The arena was quiet, the cameras kept running. What the cameras showed and what fans at home and in the building experienced is the central problem the Indiana Fever and the broader league now face. The product is not delivering at the level the marketing has promised. The starters are performing. Caitlin Clark, by individual statistical measures, is having a productive season. Aliyah Boston continues to function as one of the more complete forwards in the league, generating assists and offensive rebounds at a rate that reflects genuine skill and preparation. Sophie Cunningham, in her role as a perimeter contributor and veteran presence, has been consistent. The top of the roster is not the failure point. The failure point is everything beneath it. And the question that the fan base, the coaching staff, and the front office all face, but have not yet answered to collective satisfaction, is who is responsible for that and what specifically is being done to address it. The honeymoon phase, as multiple longtime observers of the franchise have described it, is over. That phrase carries specific meaning in this context. It does not mean that interest in Caitlin Clark has collapsed. It does not mean that the fan base has fundamentally abandoned women's basketball. What it means is that the portion of the audience that arrived with enthusiasm and optimism and was willing to extend patience through the early difficulties of a rebuilding roster has reached the limits of that patience. They came because they believed the organization was building something. The evidence available to them now suggests the building process has stalled. That assessment is visible in the secondary ticket market. It is visible in the overhead shots of the arena. It is visible in the comment sections and fan forums where the discourse has shifted over the course of several months, from anticipatory to critical. The enthusiasm has not disappeared. It has curdled into frustration. And frustrated audiences are more difficult to re-engage than indifferent ones because they have already made an emotional investment and feel that investment has not been honored. The coaching criticism in particular has sharpened over time in ways that track with specific game events. After losses in which Clark was visibly underused, games where shot distribution data showed her taking fewer attempts than role players on the opposing team, the volume of criticism directed at White increased noticeably. After games in which the second unit produced a lead that the starters had established, commentary about rotation decisions became more technical and more pointed. Fans who might previously have accepted general explanations about development and process were asking, with increasing specificity, about individual lineup decisions and whether they were supported by any observable analytical rationale. The league has not provided a response to these criticisms that the fan base has found satisfying. Official communications have emphasized growth metrics, broadcast numbers, and league-wide attendance trends. These figures are not fabricated. The WNBA has, by multiple measures, experienced meaningful audience expansion over the last 2 seasons. But the specific situation in Indiana, and the specific problems being identified by the people who were most invested in the Fever's success, require a more granular response than aggregate league data provides. The fans asking whether Stephanie White's scheme is limiting Caitlin Clark are not asking about the league's overall television ratings. They are asking about a specific team, a specific player, and a specific set of decisions that they believe are producing suboptimal outcomes. Whether those criticisms are entirely fair is a separate question from whether they represent the genuine perception of the franchise's core audience. They do. The comments, the attendance data, and the secondary market pricing all point in the same direction. The people who are supposed to be the foundation of sustainable growth in Indiana are communicating through multiple channels simultaneously that they are not satisfied with what they are seeing. There are personnel decisions approaching that will function as a test of whether the front office has registered this signal. Roster moves in the coming weeks will indicate whether the organization has concluded that depth is a solvable problem and is actively solving it, or whether it intends to continue operating with the current structure and hoping that the star talent at the top of the roster is sufficient to generate wins. Given the competitive schedule ahead, and given that the gap between Indiana's starting five and its bench has been exposed by opponents with far less overall talent, the latter strategy carries substantial risk, both on the court and in terms of continued fan engagement.